known as the Ghost of Ramadi. Caleb Sterling was a legendary SEAL sniper fighting a new war against the doctors trying to save him. He had broken an orderly's jaw, terrifying the staff until they prepared a medically induced coma to stop the violence. Then Sarah arrived, a transfer nurse with a quiet demeanor. She didn't bring sedatives. She brought a classified secret. When she leaned in and whispered 5 words into the dying warrior's ear, the screaming stopped instantly. What did she know that the generals didn't? The shocking truth was buried in a mission that never officially happened. The fluorescent lights of Walter Reed National Military Medical Center usually hummed with a sterile, comforting consistency. But on the 4th floor specifically, in the high-security containment wing, known among the staff as the cage, the air felt heavy, charged with the static of violence and despair. Dr. Gregory Whitman stood behind the safety glass, his knuckles white as he gripped the clipboard. He watched the man in room 402. "He's ripping the IVs out again," Whitman muttered, checking his watch. "That's the 3rd time this shift. If we don't get the antibiotics into him, the sepsis will kill him before the trauma does." Beside him, head nurse Brenda Miller adjusted her glasses, her face pinched with exhaustion. "I can't send my people in there, doctor. You saw what he did to Ramirez. The kid needed 6 stitches in his forehead. Sterling isn't a patient anymore. He's a weapon that hasn't been deactivated." Inside the room, the man known as Master Chief Caleb Sterling was a terrifying ruin. Even emaciated by weeks of infection and blood loss, his frame was imposing. His body was a tapestry of scars, shrapnel form, Helmand, a knife wound from the Horn of Africa, and the fresh, jagged suture line running down his torso from the ambush that had finally brought him down. He was thrashing against the leather restraints, his eyes wide and unseeing, screaming orders to a squad that was no longer there. "RPG, 3 o'clock. Get down, damn it!" Sterling roared, his voice a gravelly shred of its former command. He pulled against the leather cuff on his right wrist so hard the metal bed frame rattled against the floor bolts. "He's hallucinating," Whitman said, marking the chart. "The fever is spiking. 104 degrees. His brain is cooking. If we don't sedate him heavily, his heart is going to give out." "We've maxed him out on haloperidol and Ativan," Brenda replied, her voice low. "He burns through it. It's like his metabolism is fighting the meds the same way he fights us. We need a sitter in the room, someone to talk him down, but I can't in good conscience order anyone to sit in that chair." The door to the nurse's station buzzed open. A woman walked in. She looked unremarkable at first glance. Brown hair pulled back in a functional messy bun, scrubs that were clean, but slightly faded, and tired eyes that held a strange hollow depth. She carried a thermos of coffee as if it were a lifeline. "I'm here for the 1900 shift," she said softly. Her ID badge read S. Mitchell, RN. Brenda looked up surprised. "Mitchell? You're the agency nurse sent from Mercy General." "Yes, Sarah Mitchell. You know this is a high-security trauma ward, right?" Brenda asked, skepticism dripping from her tone. "We deal with amputations, severe TBI, and combat psychosis. It's not the geriatric ward." Sarah didn't flinch. She just looked through the glass at the thrashing figure of Caleb Sterling. "I read the file. Sepsis, multiple gunshot wounds, severe PTSD, unresponsive to verbal de-escalation." "Unresponsive is a polite way of putting it," Dr. Whitman scoffed. "He's feral. We're discussing a medically induced coma within the hour." Sarah stepped closer to the glass. She watched Sterling's mouth moving, reading the shapes of the words he was screaming. Cover fire, extraction, eagle, broken. A flicker of recognition crossed her face, gone so fast neither the doctor nor the head nurse noticed. "Don't put him in a coma," Sarah said. It wasn't a request. Whitman turned, eyebrows raised. "Excuse me. If you put him under, he stays in the nightmare," Sarah said, her voice steady but quiet. "He's not fighting you. He's fighting the ambush. If you sedate him, you trap him there. He needs to be grounded. And you think you can ground him?" Brenda laughed, a harsh, dry sound. "Honey, we had a psychiatrist with 30 years of experience in there." Sterling threw a bedpan at his head. "The man is a Navy SEAL sniper. He is trained to kill, and right now his brain thinks we are the enemy." Sarah set her thermos down. She walked over to the supply cart and grabbed a pair of gloves. "I'll take his room." The station went silent. "I can't authorize that," Whitman said. "Liability." "I'll sign a waiver," Sarah said, already tying a plastic isolation gown over her scrubs. "You need the antibiotics in him within the hour, or he goes septic shock. You can't get a vein if he's thrashing. I'll get him to hold still." Brenda exchanged a look with Whitman. They were desperate. They were understaffed. And frankly, they were terrified of the man in 402. "If he hurts you," Brenda warned, "security is 30 seconds out. Don't be a hero. Just get the IV in and get out." Sarah nodded. She didn't look like a hero. She looked like a woman walking to the gallows who had accepted her fate long ago. She swiped her badge on the reader. The heavy magnetic lock clicked disengaged. She took a deep breath, not of fear, but of preparation. She wasn't just walking into a hospital room. She was walking back into the war. The air inside room 402 smelled of rubbing alcohol, sweat, and the metallic tang of old blood. The rhythmic whoosh click of the ventilator, which Sterling had fought off earlier, stood idle in the corner. The only sound was Sterling's ragged, wet breathing and the straining of the leather straps. Sarah closed the door behind her. The sound of the latch clicking shut made Sterling freeze. His head snapped toward her. His eyes were bloodshot pupils dilated to black saucers. He didn't see a nurse. In his delirium, he saw an insurgent entering the kill zone. "Contact front," he rasped, his voice tearing at his throat. He lunged the bed, heaving. "Back, get back!" Sarah didn't retreat. She didn't raise her hands in the universal calm down gesture that medical staff usually used. Instead, she stood perfectly still. Her hands at her sides, palms open but low. Her posture wasn't defensive. It was attentive. "Caleb," she said. Her voice wasn't the soothing, high-pitched tone nurses used for children. It was low, flat, and authoritative. "Traitors!" Caleb screamed, spitting the word. "You left us! You left us in the valley!" He yanked his left arm, and a fresh trickle of blood ran down his wrist where the restraint was digging into his skin. Sarah took a step forward. "Don't come closer," he roared. "I'll kill you, I'll—" He choked on a cough, his body convulsing. The heart monitor began to wail, the tachycardia alarm flashing red. Sarah moved then. She didn't run, but she moved with a tactical efficiency that didn't match her resume. She closed the distance to the bedside. Caleb lashed out his free hand, which he had somehow partially worked out of the strap, swinging a heavy plastic water pitcher he'd grabbed from the side table. It was a clumsy blow, but it had the weight of a desperate man behind it. The pitcher smashed into Sarah's shoulder. It hurt, a sharp, bruising impact that would turn purple by morning. But she didn't flinch, and she didn't cry out. She absorbed the blow and used the moment of his overextension to step right up to the rail. She leaned down, her face inches from his, ignoring the sweat and the rage radiating off him. "Sterling!" she said, her voice cutting through his screams. He was winding up for another hit, his eyes wild. She leaned closer to his ear, her lips brushing the stubble on his jaw, and whispered 5 words. 5 words that Dr. Whitman and Nurse Brenda outside the glass couldn't hear. 5 words that no civilian should have known. Sierra won. Blind justice. Checkmate. The effect was instantaneous. It was as if she had cut the strings of a marionette. Caleb's arm dropped. The tension drained from his neck. His eyes, previously darting around the room, in a frenzy locked onto hers with a terrifying laser-like focus. The monitor slowed its frantic beeping. He stared at her, his chest heaving. The hallucinations of the hospital room, the enemies, the fire, the smoke seemed to recede, replaced by the confusion of reality. "Who?" His voice was a broken whisper. "Who are you?" Sarah didn't answer immediately. She reached down gently, took his wrist, and loosened the restraint that was cutting into his skin. He didn't fight her. He watched her hands, steady, precise, calloused. "We need to get the antibiotics in Caleb," she said, her voice returning to a professional calm, though her eyes remained locked on his. "The infection is winning. I need you to let me work." He blinked, sweat dripping into his eyes. You said the code." "I did." That op is redacted. It doesn't exist." "I know," Sarah said. She prepped the IV line, her movements practiced and swift. "That's why you're going to let me treat you. Because I'm the only one in this building who knows you aren't crazy." Caleb watched her. The rage was gone, replaced by a profound, haunting suspicion. "Sierra 1, he muttered. "That was the comms channel. The Overwatch." Sarah stopped. She held the needle looking at him. "I was the voice, Caleb. I was the one who told you to turn left at the ridge." Caleb's breath hitched. A tear, hot and angry, leaked from the corner of his eye. You're the reason I'm alive. And you're the reason my men are dead." Sarah didn't look away. "We have a lot to talk about. But first, the medicine." Slowly, Caleb extended his arm. He stopped fighting. Outside the glass, Dr. Whitman's jaw dropped. "What on earth did she say to him?" he whispered to Brenda. "I don't know," Brenda said, shivering slightly. "But look at him. He looks like he just saw a ghost." For the next 3 hours, Sarah Mitchell was the guardian of room 402. She changed his dressings, a gruesome task involving packing gauze into the deep tissue wounds on his thigh. Any other patient would have screamed. Caleb just stared at the ceiling, grinding his teeth, sweat pooling in his clavicles. Sarah worked in silence, but it was a companionable silence. The kind of silence shared by 2 people who have seen the same horrors. Around 0200 hours, the fever broke. Caleb's temperature dropped to 100.5. He was lucid for the first time in 4 days. "Water," he croaked. Sarah was there instantly, holding a cup with a straw to his lips. "Slowly. You'll vomit." He drank, his eyes tracking her face. Now that the delirium had faded, he was studying her with the analytical intensity of a sniper. He was looking for threats, for tells, for lies. "You're not a nurse," he rasped. "I am a nurse," Sarah corrected, checking his vitals monitor. "RN, licensed in Virginia and Maryland." "Bullshit," Caleb whispered. "You move like a field operative. You took that hit from the pitcher like it was nothing. And you know the code." Sarah pulled the stool over and sat down. The hospital was quiet now, the night shift settling into its graveyard rhythm. "I am a nurse now," she said carefully. "Before that, I was an intelligence analyst for the NSA, seconded to JSOC, Joint Special Operations Command. I was the tactical communications officer for Operation Blind Justice." Caleb flinched at the name. Blind Justice. The operation that had ended his career and taken his team. "I was in the TOC Tactical Operations Center in Bagram," Sarah continued softly. "I was watching your drone feed. I was the one talking to you when the comms went down." Caleb closed his eyes. The hospital room melted away. 3 years ago. The Arghandab Valley, Afghanistan. The heat was suffocating even at night. Caleb callsign Wraith was perched on a limestone ridge looking through the scope of his Macmillan TAC-50. His spotter, Joker, Petty Officer Mike Duncroft, was beside him. "Wraith to Overwatch. We have eyes on the HVT. Compound is active. Waiting on green light." The voice in his earpiece had been calm, female, and crisp. "Solid copy, Wraith. Hold position. We have thermal movement 2 clicks north. Possible flank." That voice. It had been his lifeline. For 6 hours she had guided them. She had warned them of patrols. She had been the angel on his shoulder. And then it had gone wrong. The intel was bad. The meeting they were watching was a trap. The flank wasn't possible. It was already there. "Ambush, ambush. We are taking effective fire from the east," Joker had screamed. "Pull back to extraction point Alpha." The female voice had ordered her tone, shifting from calm to urgent, but never panicked. "Wraith, you have a technical moving up the wadi. 200 meters. Engage." He had fired. He had dropped the driver. But there were too many. Mortars started walking up the ridge. Joker took a hit to the neck. The radio filled with static and screams. The last thing he remembered before the medevac chopper, which arrived 2 hours too late for Joker, was that voice. "Stay with me, Wraith. Keep talking. I'm not leaving you. Focus on my voice. Breathe." Back in the hospital room, Caleb opened his eyes. He looked at Sarah. "I thought I imagined you," he whispered. "I thought you were just my brain trying to comfort me while I bled out." "I stayed on the line for 4 hours," Sarah said, her voice trembling slightly for the first time. "Even after your radio went dead, I kept talking, just in case you could hear me. I violated protocol. My CO ordered me to switch frequencies to coordinate the airstrike, but I refused to disconnect from your personal comms." "Why?" Caleb asked. "Because I sent you there," Sarah said, a tear finally escaping and tracking down her cheek. "The intel that put you on that ridge, it came from my desk. I analyzed the signal intercepts. I said the area was clear. The silence in the room was deafening. This was the twist, the knife in the wound. She wasn't just his savior. In a way, she was the architect of his nightmare." Caleb's face hardened. "You authorized the mission. I provided the assessment. It was wrong. We were being fed false data by a double agent in the Afghan National Army. I didn't catch it until it was too late." Caleb looked away, staring at the wall. The monitor beeped faster. Anger, grief, and confusion swirled in his chest. He wanted to strangle her. He wanted to thank her. "So you're here to what?" Caleb asked, his voice cold. Atone. "Wash away the guilt by changing my bedpans." "I'm here because you're in danger, Caleb," Sarah said, leaning in, her voice dropping to a whisper again. Caleb frowned. "I'm in a hospital. I'm dying of sepsis. I know the danger." "No." Sarah shook her head. "The sepsis is manageable. The double agent who fed us the bad intel. The one who set up the ambush. He's dead," Caleb said. "Drone strike. 2 weeks later." "That's the official story," Sarah said. She reached into her scrub pocket and pulled out a small folded piece of paper. She unfolded it and held it up for him to see. It was a printout of a pharmacy order for Caleb Sterling, patient 402. "Look at the medication list," she said. Caleb squinted. "Antibiotics, painkillers. So what?" "Look at the dosage for the potassium chloride." Sarah pointed. Caleb, having been a medic in his early years, looked at the number. His eyes widened. That's a lethal dose. That would stop my heart." "Exactly," Sarah said, tucking the paper away. "This was ordered 2 hours ago. By a doctor who doesn't exist in the hospital registry. It was scheduled to be administered in the morning IV bag." Caleb tried to sit up, but fell back weak. "Someone is trying to kill me here." "The double agent wasn't just some Afghan soldier," Sarah said grimly. "The leak came from inside. Someone high up wanted your team gone because you saw something in that compound you weren't supposed to see. And now they know you're waking up. They know you might remember." "Remember what? I don't know," Sarah said. "But I intend to find out. And I intend to get you out of here before the morning shift starts. Because that doctor who ordered the potassium. He's coming to check on his work at 600. Caleb looked at the clock. It was 3:45. "I can't walk," Caleb said. "My leg is shredded." "I know," Sarah said. She stood up and moved to the window, peering through the blinds at the dark parking lot below. "That's why we're not walking. We're taking the hearse." The digital clock on the wall flickered to 4:15. The hospital was in the deepest part of its slumber, that eerie twilight hour, where only the gravest emergencies and the dead were moving. Sarah moved with a terrifying efficiency. She didn't just unplug the machines, she hacked them. Pulling a small tablet from her scrub waistband tech that was definitely not standard issue for a nurse, she spliced a loop into the central monitoring station's feed. On the screens at the nurse's station, Caleb Sterling's heart rate would continue to show a steady, albeit elevated 100 beats per minute. His oxygen saturation would look stable. To the world outside room 402, the monster was sleeping. "You have to trust me," Sarah whispered, pulling a heavy black zippered bag from the bottom of the supply cart. It wasn't a laundry bag. It was a body bag. Caleb stared at it, his face pale and beaded with cold sweat. The pain in his leg was a dull, throbbing roar, but the adrenaline of the situation was sharpening his mind. "I'm not going out in a bag, Sarah. That's bad juju. It's the only way out of the ward without a security clearance scan," she hissed. "The morgue elevator is the only one that doesn't require a badge swipe for the basement levels. The orderlies use it to transport expired patients. We have a 10-minute window before the night shift orderly, a guy named Stan, comes for his rounds. If we aren't in the basement by then, we're trapped." Caleb gritted his teeth and nodded. "Do it." Getting a 200-pound seal with a shattered leg and a recovering sepsis infection into a body bag was a nightmare of physics and pain. Caleb suppressed a scream as he shifted his weight, his vision graying out for a second. Sarah was surprisingly strong, bracing his weight, guiding his movements with professional detachment. "Breathe," she commanded softly. "Dissociate. Go to your happy place." "My happy place is a bar in San Diego." Caleb grunted, squeezing his eyes shut as she zipped the bag up to his chest. And you're buying the first round. Deal. Now stay absolutely silent. If you cough, if you groan, we're dead. She zipped the bag shut. Darkness swallowed him. The smell of plastic and chemical disinfectant was overwhelming. He felt the lurch as Sarah hoisted the gurney and unlocked the wheels. The journey down the hallway was a symphony of terrifying sounds magnified by the darkness of the bag, the squeak of the gurney wheel, the distant murmur of voices at the nurse's station. "Night, Sarah!" a voice called out. It was Brenda. Caleb's heart hammered against his ribs, so hard he was sure they could hear it through the plastic. "Good night, Brenda." Sarah's voice was calm, casual. "Just taking the trash down and grabbing more saline on the way back up." "All right. Hey, is he asleep, the monster?" "Out like a light," Sarah said. "Finally broke the fever." "Thank God. Maybe we'll get a quiet shift after all." The gurney kept moving. The sounds of the ward faded, replaced by the hollow echo of the elevator lobby. Caleb felt the vibration of the call button being pressed. The ding of the elevator arrival was loud as a gunshot. They rolled in. The doors slid shut. The sensation of descending was nauseating for Caleb in his enclosed space. The doors opened into the basement. The air temperature dropped 10 degrees. The morgue. "We're clear," Sarah whispered, unzipping the bag just enough for him to breathe fresh air. Caleb gasped, gulping down the cool air. "That was the longest 3 minutes of my life." "We're not done," Sarah said, pushing the gurney toward the loading bay. "The hearse is waiting. My contact left it unlocked." They reached the bay doors. A sleek black vehicle was backed up to the ramp. It wasn't a standard hearse. It was a modified transport van used by a private funeral home, Restful Gardens. Sarah opened the back doors, but as she turned to help Caleb out of the bag, a shadow detached itself from the pillar near the driver's side. "You're off shift early, Nurse Mitchell," a deep, smooth voice said. Sarah froze. Her hand went instinctively to her pocket, where she had a scalpel she'd swiped from the tray. A man stepped into the light. He was wearing a suit that cost more than Sarah's car. He had silver hair, a winning smile, and eyes that were completely dead. "And you seem to be stealing government property," the man said, nodding at the body bag. "Mr. Sterling is a very expensive asset. We can't just have him wandering off." Caleb recognized the voice. It wasn't a doctor. It wasn't a soldier. "Fletcher." Caleb rasped from the bag, the name clawing its way up from his suppressed memories. Garrison Fletcher. The name hit the air like a curse. He wasn't military. He was a private defense contractor. The CEO of Aegis Global. The man who handled the dirty logistics for off-the-books operations in the Middle East. Fletcher smiled, pulling a silenced pistol from his jacket. "You remember me, Master Chief? That's unfortunate. I was hoping the sepsis would have scrambled your brains enough to make this easier." "You set us up," Caleb growled, struggling to sit up in the bag, but the heavy zipper snagged. "I managed a risk," Fletcher corrected. "Your team stumbled onto a heroin shipment that was financing essential allies. You weren't supposed to be there. You were supposed to be 5 miles east." He raised the gun, aiming it at Sarah's chest. "Step away from the gurney, Sarah. You're a smart girl. Former NSA. You know how the game is played. You walk away. Now you disappear. You live. You try to play hero. And you become just another tragic suicide in the hospital parking lot." Sarah stood her ground. She looked at the gun, then at Fletcher. She didn't look scared. She looked calculating. "You're right, Garrison," she said. I do know how the game is played. That's why I didn't come alone. Fletcher frowned. What? Sarah raised her left hand. In it, she held a dead man's switch trigger, a small remote connected to the hospital's oxygen mainline valve, which ran directly along the wall behind Fletcher. I rigged the main oxygen feed with a shaped charge I made from cleaning supplies and a defib battery. She lied. Or maybe she wasn't lying. With Sarah, it was hard to tell. You fire that gun, my thumb slips. This entire basement becomes a bomb. You, me, Caleb, and half the hospital go up in a fireball. Fletcher hesitated. It was just a second of doubt, but it was enough. Thump. Caleb had freed his right leg. Ignoring the agony of his torn muscles, he kicked the gurney's locking brake. The heavy steel table lurched forward, slamming into Fletcher's knees. The gun went off, pfft, shattering the rear window of the hearse. Fletcher buckled. Sarah didn't wait. She grabbed a heavy oxygen tank from the rack beside her and swung it with the force of a sledgehammer. It connected with Fletcher's temple with a sickening crunch. The contractor collapsed unconscious. Jesus. Caleb breathed, finally unzipping the rest of the bag and sliding out, nearly falling. Did you really rig the hospital to blow? Sarah looked at the remote in her hand, which was actually just the garage door opener for the hearse. She tossed it to him. No, but he didn't know that. Get in the van. They drove for 6 hours. Sarah drove like she did everything else, fast, precise, and without hesitation. They switched highways 3 times, took back roads through West Virginia, and finally wound their way up a gravel track into the deep, misty Appalachians. Caleb passed in and out of consciousness in the back. Sarah had hooked him up to a portable IV she'd stolen, and the antibiotics were fighting the war inside his blood. But the physical toll of the escape had been immense. When the van finally stopped, it was in front of a hunting cabin that looked like it hadn't been used since the 1990s. Where are we? Caleb groaned as Sarah opened the back doors. The mountain air was crisp and smelled of pine and wet earth. My father's place, Sarah said. He was a survivalist. Died 2 years ago. No one knows I kept the deed. It's off the grid. No cell service, well water generator power. We're safe here. Getting Caleb inside was another struggle. But once he was settled on the dusty leather couch, covered in blankets, and the fire was roaring in the stone hearth, the tension began to bleed out of the room. Sarah boiled water. She cleaned his wounds again. She made instant soup. It was domesticity born of desperation. You knew Garrison Fletcher, Sarah said, handing him a mug of broth. It wasn't a question. Caleb stared into the fire. The name was unlocking doors in his mind he had welded shut. He was at Bagram, Caleb said slowly. A week before the mission, he was meeting with the colonel. I saw him in the mess hall. He wasn't wearing a uniform, just that expensive suit. He looked at us like we were inventory. Aegis Global has a contract with the DoD worth $4 billion, Sarah said, sitting on the floor rug, cleaning her stolen scalpel. They handle logistics, supply chains. But the NSA started seeing flags, money moving into accounts in Pakistan that were linked to Taliban commanders. Big money. Payoffs, protection money, Sarah corrected. Fletcher was paying the insurgents to not attack his supply convoys. It's cheaper to pay the enemy than to hire more security. Caleb's grip on the mug tightened until his knuckles turned white. So my team, we were hit because the intel I analyzed, Sarah said, her voice heavy with guilt. It picked up a meeting. We thought it was a high-level terror cell planning an attack. It wasn't. It was a handover. Fletcher's men were delivering a payment to the local warlord. Cash and heroin. Your team dropped right on top of a business deal. Caleb closed his eyes. The memory hit him with the force of a physical blow. The compound. The heat. He was looking through the scope. He saw the bearded men with AK-47s. But he saw something else too. A man in a desert camo vest, but wearing civilian pants. An American. Handing a briefcase to the warlord. He had radioed it in. I have a Western male non-combatant interacting with the target. That was when the comms had gone crazy. That was when the ambush started. They couldn't let us leave, Caleb whispered. We were witnesses. Exactly, Sarah said. And when you survived, Fletcher panicked. He needed you dead before you could piece it together. That's why he sent the fake doctor. That's why he was at the hospital. Caleb looked at Sarah. For the first time, he really looked at her. Not as a nurse or a voice on the radio, but as a woman who had blown up her entire life to save him. You realize what this means, he said. You're done. You can never go back. You're a fugitive. Kidnapping, assault, theft of government property. They'll paint you as a terrorist. Sarah shrugged, a small, sad smile playing on her lips. I was done the moment I heard your voice on that radio 3 years ago, Caleb. I lived with the ghost of your team every day. I checked your file every week. When I saw the transfer order to the hospice ward, I knew I had to act. My life before this, it was just waiting for this moment. So what now? Caleb asked. We're 2 people against a billion-dollar defense contractor and the US government. Sarah stood up and walked to a rusted metal cabinet in the corner of the room. She keyed in a combination lock. My father, she said, opening the cabinet, was paranoid. He believed the government would eventually turn on its own people. She reached inside and pulled out a heavy green metal box. She set it on the table and opened it. Inside sat a high-frequency military radio, an encrypted hard drive, and a stack of cash. He was crazy, she said, but he was prepared. This drive contains the raw signal intercepts from that night, the ones my superiors told me to delete. I kept a copy. Caleb sat up straighter, ignoring the pain. You have the proof. I have the data, Sarah said, but it's encrypted with a rolling key I can't crack. I'm an analyst, not a cryptographer. To open this, we need the source code from the Aegis Global server. Caleb laughed, a dry, raspy sound. So we just need to break into the most secure private military headquarters in the world, steal their code, and upload the evidence to the press without getting killed by a private army. Sarah smiled. It was a dangerous smile. Essentially. Yes. Caleb looked at the radio. He looked at the drive. And then he looked at the woman who had saved his life twice. Well, Caleb said, reaching for his painkillers. I suppose I'm not dying today. When do we start? We don't, Sarah said. We rest. You heal. And I teach you how to walk again. Because where we're going, you're going to need to do more than walk. You're going to need to hunt. The fire crackled. Outside, the wind howled through the trees, masking the sound of a drone buzzing high, high above the cloud layer. They were safe for now. But the hunt had already begun. 3 months passed. The winter snows of Appalachia melted into the mud of early spring. Inside the cabin, a transformation had taken place. Caleb Sterling was no longer the emaciated ghost in the hospital bed. He was still scarred, and he walked with a slight permanent limp where the muscle had been shorn away, but he was lethal again. The basement of the cabin had become a dojo and a war room. Sarah had used her savings to buy burner laptops, directional antennas, and through a sketchy contact in Baltimore, a decommissioned police drone. "The target isn't the headquarters in D.C., Sarah explained, pointing to a blueprint taped to the wall. "That's just offices and lobbyists. The servers, the ones holding the raw comms data, and the financial ledgers are here." She tapped a location on the map, the Aegis Secure Logistics Facility in rural northern Virginia. To the locals, it looked like a boring distribution warehouse for shipping crates. In reality, it was a fortress. "Perimeter fence is electrified," Caleb noted, studying the satellite recon. "Armed patrols every 15 minutes. Thermal cameras on the roof. It's tighter than the embassy in Baghdad." "There's a gala tonight," Sarah said. "Fletcher is hosting a Wounded Warriors charity fundraiser in the main atrium of the facility. He loves the optics, using the men he broke to raise money for his tax write-offs." Caleb's jaw tightened. The irony is sickening. "It's our way in," Sarah said. "I've forged credentials. You're going in as a private security consultant for a donor. I'm your +1. We don't need to storm the gates. We just need to walk through the front door, access the server room in the basement, and plug in the drive to upload the decryption key." "And if they recognize me?" Caleb asked. "I'm supposed to be dead." "You have a beard, you've gained 30 pounds of muscle, and you'll be wearing a tuxedo, not fatigues. Plus, people see what they expect to see. They expect Master Chief Sterling to be a rotting corpse in a government cemetery. They won't look twice at a limping veteran in a suit." The gala was a display of grotesque opulence. Chandeliers hung from the industrial ceiling of the converted warehouse atrium. Champagne flowed. Men in multi-thousand-dollar suits clapped each other on the back, while a few carefully selected veterans in wheelchairs were paraded around for photo ops. Caleb stood by the bar, nursing a seltzer. The noise, the smell of expensive perfume, the fake laughter, it triggered a low-level hum of anxiety in his chest. But he pushed it down. He touched his earpiece. "I'm at the service elevator." Sarah's voice crackled in his ear. She was ostensibly in the ladies' room, but she had slipped into the maintenance corridor. "Looping the camera feed. Now. You have 60 seconds to get to the fire stairwell on the north wall." Caleb moved. He didn't run. He walked with a purposeful stride, looking like a man looking for a restroom. He slipped through the staff-only door just as a security guard turned the corner. "Clear," he whispered. He descended the stairs. The basement level was cool and hummed with the sound of massive cooling fans. This was the brain of the beast. He met Sarah at the junction. She was no longer wearing her evening gown. She had stripped it off to reveal a black tactical bodysuit underneath. She was working on a keypad with a brute force decryption tool. 30 seconds, she muttered. "Encryption is military grade." "We don't have 30 seconds, Caleb whispered. He heard footsteps approaching from the hallway. Heavy boots, tactical gear. Caleb pulled the suppressed pistol they had taken from Fletcher's hitman at the hospital. He pressed his back to the wall. 2 guards rounded the corner. They didn't even have time to shout. Caleb moved with the terrifying muscle memory of a Tier 1 operator. Pop, 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 pop. 2 controlled pairs to the chest plates, followed by takedowns. He dragged the unconscious men he had aimed for the ceramic plates to wind them, then knocked them out physically. Sarah had insisted on no bodies if possible into a janitor's closet. "We're in," Sarah said, as the light on the door turned green. The server room was a cathedral of blue, blinking lights, rows of black towers stretched into the dark. Sarah ran to the main terminal. Her fingers flew across the keyboard. "I'm initiating the handshake," she said. "The drive is connected. I'm uploading the raw intercept data. The system is trying to reject it, but... Gotcha. I'm bypassing the firewall." A red light began to flash on the ceiling, a silent alarm. "They know," Caleb said, checking the magazine of his pistol. "How long?" "Upload is at 40%, Sarah said, not looking up. "I need 3 minutes." "You've got 2, Caleb said, moving to the door. He could hear the elevator humming. The cavalry was coming. The hallway outside the server room didn't just explode. It disintegrated. One moment, the corridor was a sterile expanse of brushed steel and silence. The next, it was a strobe light nightmare of muzzle flashes and shattering drywall. Caleb slid across the polished floor, his shoulder slamming into the heavy steel frame of the server room door, just as a hail of 5.56 rounds chewed up the wall where his head had been a second earlier. He gritted his teeth, ignoring the screaming protest of his injured leg. This was the friction, the chaotic, deafening reality of close-quarters battle that no amount of planning could account for. "Status!" Caleb roared over the din, popping out to fire 2 controlled rounds down the hall. He saw a mercenary stumble his vest, absorbing the impact, but the suppression worked. The squad advancing on them halted, retreating behind the corner of the junction. Inside the room, Sarah was huddled beneath the main console, her face illuminated by the harsh, rhythmic pulsing of the blue server lights. She wasn't cowering. She was working. Her fingers flew across the laptop keyboard with a speed that blurred in the low light, her eyes darting between her screen and the massive Aegis mainframe towers towering above her like black monoliths. "The encryption is mutating," Sarah shouted, her voice tight but devoid of hysteria. "Fletcher's system is trying to isolate the drive. It's fighting me like a biological immune system. I have to rewrite the handshake protocol manually." "I don't need the tech specs. Sarah, I need a time." Caleb fired again, shattering a light fixture 30 feet away to plunge the approach into darkness. He was buying them seconds with darkness and fear, but he was running low on ammunition. He checked the magazine of the pistol. 3 rounds. He had 1 spare mag left in his pocket. 2 minutes, Sarah yelled back. "The upload is at 40%. If I pull it now, the data is corrupted. It has to be 100% or it's useless. We don't have 2 minutes. The enemy knew it too. They stopped firing blindly." Caleb heard the distinct metallic clack hiss of a flashbang canister hitting the floor tiles. "Eyes!" he screamed, turning away and clamping his hands over his ears. The bang was a concussive slap that rattled his teeth. Even with his eyes closed, the flash seared his retinas red. Before the ringing in his ears subsided, he sensed movement. They were rushing the door. Caleb moved on pure instinct, a muscle memory forged in the dusty alleyways of Ramadi and the mountains of Kandahar. He didn't rise. He stayed low, sweeping the leg of the first shadow that darkened the doorway. The mercenary fell hard, his rifle clattering away. Caleb didn't hesitate. He rose, using the man's body as a shield, and fired point blank into the chest plate of the second man, coming through the smoke. The man winded, collapsing backward. Caleb grabbed the fallen mercenary's carbine, a high-end customized HK-416, and kicked the door shut, jamming the deadbolt. "They're cutting the power," Sarah warned. The blue lights on the servers flickered and died, plunging the room into total darkness, save for the glow of her laptop screen. "They think that stops the upload. Joke's on them, I'm running off the backup battery in the drive." 60%, she whispered, the progress bar crawling forward with agonizing slowness. Outside, the door handle rattled violently. Then came the sound of a drill. They were boring through the lock. "We can't stay here," Caleb said, his voice dropping to a lethal calm. He scanned the room. There was no other exit. Just rows of cooling fans and the ventilation shafts, The moment that door opens, they frag the room. Sarah's eyes locked onto his. 80%. 85%. The drill whined, metal shearing against metal. 90%. Caleb raised the stolen rifle, aiming at the door. He took a breath, slowing his heart rate, pushing the pain in his leg into a small locked box in his mind. Done. Sarah yanked the drive from the port. The packets are out. Washington Post, New York Times, the FBI Cyber Division Dropbox. It's gone. It's everywhere. Grab the gear, Caleb ordered. We aren't going out the front. He turned and fired a burst into the large industrial ventilation grate near the floor. He kicked it in. Go. It drops into the sub-basement garage. I saw the schematics. Sarah scrambled through the opening. Caleb fired one last suppressing burst through the door as the lock gave way, then dove into the shaft after her. They slid down the metal chute, tumbling out onto the concrete floor of the underground garage. It was a cavernous space smelling of oil-cold cement and exhaust. Rows of luxury cars and armored SUVs sat silent in the gloom. The exit ramp is north, Caleb said, helping Sarah to her feet. She was shaking now, the adrenaline crash hitting her. But she nodded, clutching the drive like a holy relic. They ran their footsteps echoing in the vast emptiness. They reached the base of the ramp, the cool night air, visible through the open shutter at the top. Freedom was 50 yards away. I wouldn't, a voice boomed, amplified by the acoustics of the garage. Caleb skidded to a halt, throwing his arm out to stop Sarah. Emerging from behind a black armored Suburban was Garrison Fletcher. He looked maddeningly composed, his tuxedo unruffled his silver hair, catching the light from the overhead sodium lamps. But the arrogance in his posture was backed by force. 4 tactical contractors flanked him. Weapons raised laser sights painting glowing red dots on Caleb's chest. And in Fletcher's right hand, he held a dead man's switch, a thick plastic remote with a thumb depressed on the plunger. I monitored the data stream, Fletcher said, his voice smooth, cultured, and utterly sociopathic. He stepped forward, his shoes clicking on the concrete. You uploaded the files. Very clever, Nurse Mitchell. I assume you think you've won. It proves you sold out American soldiers, Sarah shouted, her voice breaking with rage. It proves you took heroin money to let the Taliban hunt my unit. It proves someone did, Fletcher corrected with a chilling smile. But history is written by the survivors, isn't it? By tomorrow morning, the narrative will be corrected. 2 disgruntled, mentally unstable domestic terrorists, a disgraced nurse, addicted to painkillers, and a brain-damaged sniper broke into a charity gala. They killed guards. They caused a panic. And tragically, they detonated a suicide vest in the parking garage. Caleb's eyes narrowed. He looked at the pillars supporting the massive structure. At the base of the nearest 3 columns, he saw the blocks of C4 wired and blinking with a steady red cadence. You'd bring the building down, Caleb asked, his voice low. There are 300 people upstairs, donors, civilians. Collateral damage, Fletcher shrugged. Tragic, yes, but necessary to protect the greater good, which is to say, Aegis Global. I blow the supports, the floor above collapses, crushing the server room and everyone in it. I walk away the survivor, the hero who tried to stop you. He raised the detonator slightly. Drop the weapon, Master Chief, or we all die right now. Caleb calculated the odds. Distance 20 meters, 4 tangos with rifles, 1 HVT with a detonator. If he shot Fletcher, the dead man's switch might trigger if his thumb slipped. If he surrendered, they died. If he did nothing, they died. He's going to do it anyway, Sarah whispered, terrified. He can't let us live." "I know," Caleb murmured. He needed a distraction, not a noise, but a shock to the system. Something to break the standoff for the half-second he needed. His eyes flicked up. Running directly above Fletcher's head was a massive red industrial pipe labeled fire suppression, halon/water mix, Sierra 1. Checkmate. "Sarah," Caleb whispered, barely moving his lips. "Drop." "What drop?" Sarah threw herself flat onto the oil-stained concrete. In the same heartbeat, Caleb didn't aim for Fletcher. He swung the barrel of the HK-4-16 upward and squeezed the trigger. The burst of 5.56 rounds punched through the pressurized main pipe. The result was cataclysmic. The pipe didn't just leak, it exploded. A jet of freezing, chemical-laced water blasted downward with the force of a hydraulic hammer. It hit Fletcher and his two nearest guards like the fist of God. Fletcher was knocked off his feet instantly, the detonator flying from his hand and skittering across the wet floor. The other guards flinched, blinded by the sudden deluge and the roar of escaping pressure. Caleb moved. He didn't run. He hunted. He closed the distance in 3 strides. He drove the butt of his rifle into the face of the first guard, hearing the nose crunch. He didn't stop. He spun, sweeping the leg of the second man and delivering a non-lethal but incapacitating stomp to the solar plexus. Fletcher was scrambling on his hands and knees, water soaking his tuxedo, desperately clawing for the detonator that lay 5 feet away. Caleb reached him just as Fletcher's fingers brushed the plastic. With a grimace of effort, Caleb brought his boot down on Fletcher's hand. The sound of breaking metacarpals was sickeningly loud, followed by Fletcher's high-pitched scream. Caleb kicked the detonator away, sending it sliding into a drainage grate. He grabbed Fletcher by the lapels of his ruined jacket and hauled him up, slamming him against the concrete pillar. He pressed the hot muzzle of the rifle under Fletcher's chin. The garage fell silent, save for the hissing of the broken pipe. "Do it," Sarah said, standing up, water dripping from her hair. Her eyes were hard. "End it, Caleb. For the team. For Joker." Caleb looked into Garrison Fletcher's eyes. The arrogance was gone. The sociopathic calm had shattered. All that was left was a pathetic, trembling fear. Fletcher was panting, his eyes darting, begging without speaking. Caleb's finger tightened on the trigger. It would be so easy. It would be justice. An eye for an eye. A life for a squad. But then he remembered the hospital. He remembered the rage that had almost consumed him in that bed. If he pulled this trigger, he wasn't Caleb Sterling anymore. He was just another killer Fletcher had created. "No," Caleb said. He lowered the rifle. "What?" Sarah gasped, stepping forward. "He'll walk. Guys like him always walk. Not this time," Caleb said, his voice like grinding stones. "He wants to be a martyr. He wants to die a victim of terrorists. If I kill him, he wins. He becomes the hero on the evening news." Caleb shifted his grip on the rifle and whipped the stock across Fletcher's temple. The CEO crumpled to the floor, unconscious, broken, and pathetic. "We leave him," Caleb said, looking at the unconscious form. "The police are 5 minutes out. The files are public. Let him wake up in handcuffs. Let him spend the next 40 years in a federal supermax, watching his empire get stripped for parts. Let him rot knowing a crippled soldier took him down." He looked at Sarah. "That is hard karma. Death is too easy for him." Sarah stared at him for a long moment. Then slowly the tension left her shoulders. She nodded. "Sirens," she said. Close. Let's go. They slipped out a side maintenance hatch, vanishing into the cool Virginia woods just as the blue lights of the SWAT vans painted the garage walls. 6 months later. The diner was small, tucked away in the shadow of the Bitterroot Mountains in Montana. It was the kind of place where the coffee was strong, the pie was homemade, and nobody asked questions about where you came from. The television mounted in the corner above the counter was playing the national news out. In a landmark verdict today, former Aegis Global CEO Garrison Fletcher was sentenced to 3 consecutive life terms, without the possibility of parole. The conviction comes after a massive data leak exposed a global racketeering and treason operation. The leak, provided by an anonymous source known only as Sierra One, revealed the waitress, a woman named Patty, who had worked there for 30 years, refilled the mugs of the couple in the corner booth. "You folks need anything else?" she asked kindly. The man looked up. His beard was trimmed now, and though he still favored his right leg, the darkness that had once clouded his eyes was gone. He looked at the woman sitting across from him, a woman who was currently sketching the mountain range on a napkin. "No thank you, Patty," Caleb said. "We're good." Sarah looked up from her drawing as the news anchor continued to detail the dismantling of Fletcher's empire. She smiled, a genuine, soft expression that reached her eyes. "You think they're still looking for us?" Caleb asked quietly, nodding toward the screen where a blurred photo of his old military ID was being shown under the headline, "The Ghost of Ramadi." Sarah took a sip of her coffee, looking out the window at the vast, endless pine forests. "Let them look," she said. "The world thinks Caleb Sterling died in that hospital, and in a way he did. You're free, Caleb. We both are." Caleb reached across the table and took her hand. It was a simple gesture, but it carried the weight of everything they had survived. The war was over. The mission was complete. "Ghosts can go anywhere," Caleb whispered. "Anywhere," Sarah agreed. "But I like it here." Caleb Sterling took a sip of his coffee. For the first time in 3 years, it didn't taste like ash. It tasted like morning. And that is the story of how one nurse refused to give up on a soldier that the world wanted dead. It's a powerful reminder that sometimes the most dangerous weapon on the battlefield isn't a sniper rifle. It's the truth, and someone brave enough to stand up and speak it when everyone else is silent. This story shows us that real strength isn't just about fighting. It's about knowing when to show mercy, even to those who don't deserve it. Caleb chose the harder path, justice over revenge, and in doing so, he saved his own soul. If you enjoyed this intense story of survival, betrayal, and hard karma, justice, please destroy that like button. It really helps the channel grow and tells me you want more content like this. And if you want more stories involving special forces, high-stakes drama, and real-life heroes, make sure you hit subscribe and ring the notification bell so you never miss an upload. I want to hear from you in the comments. Do you think Caleb made the right choice letting Fletcher live to face prison, or should he have taken the shot? Let me know your thoughts below. I'll see you in the next video.